My role as ship's pilot on the Clarence is to safely bring ships into and out of port, berth them safely. Part of my job involves being the harbour master here because we have no separate harbour master. So I then become the regulator. So I'm actually telling myself what to do. On the wall is a mock-up of the entrance to the port of Yamba. The south breakwater here is now extends further out into the same distance as the north breakwater. I bring the ships in through here, then I have to move over to this side to get across there. It's only about 60 metres wide, so I need to get the ships through that section. Into the main river, and then another 4 miles up the river is the Goodwood Island Wharf, which belongs to Maritime, and all ships have to load and discharge there. So basically it's all based around safety. That's put it simply. There are two of us permanently here, myself as pilot, and we also have a port services officer. Now he drives the tug, which acts as the pilot boat, which delivers me to and from the ships. A pilot is there for the safety, so he's required to know what the conditions are, the weather, the tides, the currents, the depths. To get a pilot's license, you must have the local knowledge. You have to do so many trips in and out with a pilot. You do a lot of work on the side, learning everything that pilot knows, plus developing your own little quirky systems. You need your backup systems and what you're personally going to use. But it depends on us going out every month and checking. And because the channels change here, we need to know the latest information. We sound every month in our own tug, so we've got a survey quality sounder and we go out and do our own. In the past, signalling was done by semaphore, flags on masts and shapes. So often you wouldn't have contact with the vessel until it got here. The last port would probably contact you, or the agent or the owner would contact you by mail and saying, look, hopefully sometime in January we've got the ship arriving. That's if it's coming from overseas. If it's coming from Sydney, that you get a telegram saying it was coming. These days, of course, you've got instant messaging through, long distance, through satellite mainly these days. Once she's close, the mobile phone becomes handier than a VHF radio, and of course we still carry VHF radios. As soon as we start bringing the ship in, then between the port authority, the company, maybe the people on the wharf, the agent, and the tugs, we've all got VHF radios. So that's good for a few kilometres. So that's our instant communication. We don't have a lot of technologically advanced equipment here. It's a very small port, but everything is also very close. Radar isn't of much use to us because we're too close to everything. Also, the echoes from the targets are very weak here. But mainly it's because everything is much too close, so we operate in a very tight margin. In some places the channel is only 30 metres wide and the edges of the channel aren't marked. We just use leads, and some of the leads happen to be buildings or trees that line up with other things. So it's more the old-fashioned style. So you'll see leads marked on the charts, but they're not necessarily the ones I'm going to use. But because the channel changes all the time, I'll move further south, say on a chart, and instead of lining up the lighthouse, I'll line up the cliff, or a certain rock, or a certain tree. The next month I might line up something else. So basically it's a lot of local knowledge. Being smaller doesn't make us a lesser port. In fact, we're termed a second-class port, which I resent that implication of second class. Whereas I think in some ways we're ahead of the other ports. We've done things and brought out things that are ahead of the big ports. We started using LED navigation lights before anybody else. We had our passage plan on the internet before other ports did. So some things we're ahead of, other things we're in the past. But the things in the past are the enjoyable things. Very seldom use a tug for berthing, so it means the pilot still has to berth that ship rather than positioning the ship off a wharf and then the tug's doing all the work. I'm not saying that's not difficult, because they can have hairy times there with the big ships against the currents, and especially things like car carriers in wind, that can be very hairy. But the pleasure of actually seeing the ship you're on react the way you want it to, because you are doing it. The Yamba lighthouse is still owned by the Australian Maritime Safety Authority. It is in use and it's still maintained. It's mainly used for a longer distance. A lot of people would depend on their electronic navigation, but there's a problem with electronic navigation. If you use your power, you've got nothing. So you need to know some of the basics, some of the old stuff. So a lighthouse, it's recognisable by its characteristic. So basically you look at one lighthouse on the chart and you know it's that lighthouse because it meets the characteristic. So say the characteristic might it flashes 3 times every minute. So you can say, oh yes, that's the one at Clarence Head. For a ship, the ports is the most dangerous part of its voyage, usually. You've suddenly had all this room at sea. Of course, you get the bad storms at sea, which can be horrifying. But coming into port, you're coming into, for the captain of the ship and the crew of the ship, it's unknown waters for them usually. Everything's much closer. And it calls for a lot of local knowledge. So for them it's a risky time. So they've got one person coming on board who doesn't take command. The captain is still in command, but it's, as you write in your logbook, it's master's orders to pilot's advice. So you're putting a lot of trust in that person that you probably never met before. What makes a bar dangerous is the shallow water acting against the tide. So all bars play up, so to speak, on an ebb tide because the current is running out, the waves are running in, that forces the swell up and then they start crashing over. All bars act the same way, it's just that some are worse than others only because of the extent of it, the shallowness of it, so different bars will act slightly different, but the principle is the same. It's one action against another action, so you've got the water going out, which is the ebb tide, against the swell coming in. Shipwrecks in the area. It's been a long time since there's been one. In those days, it wouldn't have been as easy to keep checking the soundings. It would have been hand-led, so it's a lot more difficult. The bar changes quite dramatically at times, especially after a storm. In the past, even while I've been here, we've had a difference in the depth of 2 metres just overnight. And when it's getting deeper, that's fine, but when it's getting shallower, you suddenly get a swell or an ugly wave in a position that wasn't there yesterday. So it was a lot more difficult in the past to tell if you'd got any changes, so they could get caught out by that. And of course there's always human error. Ships didn't handle as well, they had less power. These days I think it's a lot safer. It is still a risk, but it's a calculated risk, and these days you work out your risk before you do it. And there's more communication between the pilot and the masters now. You work more as a team. In the old days, it tended to be the pilot came on board and you could visibly see everybody else relax and saying, oh, well, the pilot's going to do everything. But these days, that's unacceptable. You're still supposed to work as a team and help each other, point things out, watch for things. Is everything going all right? Is your compass okay? Is your steering okay? Is the man at the wheel steering okay? So it's check and recheck all the time. Safety is number one with maritime, so that's my prime concern.